Welcome to the WRAL Daily Download. I'm Jack Hagel. One of the most closely watched congressional races this election season is right in our backyard. It's the state's 13th congressional district. It's a battle between a Democratic state senator and a Trump-backed political newcomer. WRAL Capitol Bureau Chief Laura Leslie interviewed them both for a recent episode of On the Record, and she's here to join us. Laura, welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Laura, give us a quick overview of this race. Who are these candidates, and what are they all about?
Well, one candidate you might have heard of is State Senator Wiley Nickel. He served for a couple of terms now, representing Southern Wake County. So he won the Democratic primary over former State Senator Sam Searcy. So he's the nominee. So he's running against Bo Hines, who won a pretty highly contested, very large primary for this on the GOP side. Bo Hines is a newcomer, as you mentioned, backed by Trump. He played football for NC State for a year, which is kind of his claim to being part of this district. Then went off to Yale and law school and was living in the Triad and had already announced that he was going to run for a congressional seat out there. But then when lawmakers redrew these districts, he decided to run for this one instead.
And why is this race so important, both locally and in particular nationally?
Well, I mean, when you look at Congress, I mean, I think a figure I've heard is about 90% of congressional seats are already won, right? They belong to one party or the other because that's the way they've been gerrymandered, right? Or that's just the way that they are. So there's very few that are really, really competitive. And this is one of the most competitive, if not the most competitive in the whole U.S. I mean, it's very, very evenly drawn. It is the only toss-up race in the state. And it's really, to me, it's really interesting because it's a microcosm of the change that we've seen coming over in the growth in North Carolina over the last decade. So you've got Southern Wake County, which is just booming with people who've moved here from other places, leans Democrat, used to lean Republican. Now it's starting to lean a little bit more Democrat because they're getting a lot more people moving in here. Then you've got the Johnston County, which is absolutely the fastest growing county in the state, I think, right now. People moving in there as a bedroom community that, commute to the Triangle. And then you've got pieces of Wayne and Harnett who are also in there. And, those are on Wayne, I think it's the western part, and I think it includes Seymour Johnson Air Force Base, and a lot of rural area. And Harnett, of course, is very rural as well. So, anybody who's going to win this race is going to have to appeal to everybody from the folks in downtown Raleigh just about to the folks in, rural Harnett County. And that's a tough lift for any candidate.
And so can you get a sense of which one of these guys might have a chance of appealing to this changing electorate?
I think they both are going to have a challenge with it. I mean, honestly, Bo Hines is not, he did go to state and play football for a year. Maybe he's not really from this area. And nor is Wiley Nickel. Although he's lived here a little longer and he has represented part of the district, at Wake County part of the district in the legislature. But they're both trying to sort of put themselves in the position of convincing these voters, all these myriad different voters with these very, very different sets of interests, that they're going to be the person that's going to represent them the best in Congress. And that is a huge job. I think Nickel is probably going to do pretty well in Southern Wake since he has already got name recognition. He's run several times here. I think Hines is probably going to do better in the deep red areas that you're going to see, especially, the Trump endorsement. That's an imprimatur that a lot of voters are going to look for. So I think it's the swing voters that they're going to have to talk to. And I don't know that anybody knows exactly where those are in this district. Well,
and you mentioned their ties to the district and how this has sort of become this subplot, and they've kind of been at each other's throats about this. Hines kind of district shopping almost, or at least having the appearance of that. He's punched back at Nickel for his own residency issue. Tell us about that, and tell us about how it's played out. They've even made ads about this.
Right. Well, a lot of people don't know that although you have to live in a state legislative district to represent the district, in congressional districts, you don't actually have to live in them, right? So, Wiley Nickel lives just outside of the district in Cary. And so Bo Hines has made much of that. Bo Hines was living out in the Triad, but rented a house in Fuquay-Varina. So much was made about that. So, when you get right down to it, neither of these guys is exactly of the district that they are seeking to represent. So that's, of course, led to some drama, as you say, subplots. There was an ad that I think our colleague Paul Spey wrote up about that was taped in Indiana that, people said, why is Bo Hines taping an ad in Indiana? That's where his family's from. I wonder sometimes how much this really matters to voters as opposed to, political pundits and observers, but I do think, especially in the more rural areas, I think there is a real sense of place. And this is an area that's been split up among different districts for so many years, and they just haven't had a voice of their own. And so I don't know what that voice is changing, obviously. But I think that there are a lot of people who have really deep roots to this area that are going to want to, to elect somebody that they think is going to get where they're coming from.
We'll be back after the break. When we come back, we'll talk about where the candidates stand on issues like immigration and the economy and abortion. Welcome back to the WRAL Daily Download. I'm talking with WRAL Capitol Bureau Chief Laura Leslie about the competitive race for North Carolina's 13th Congressional District. Laura, you and WRAL anchor Lena Tillett interviewed both candidates. What stood out to you about what they had to say?
Well, for one thing, they would not appear on the show together. I believe it was Bo Hines who said that he did not want to appear with Wiley Nickel. They didn't want a debate format, so we had them on separately. We did not allow them to hear the question. We didn't allow them to know the questions, although honestly they should have predicted them. And we did not allow them to hear what each other said. So they weren't directly responding to each other for the most part. I think they both performed pretty much as I was expecting them to perform. Bo Hines had kind of a lot of the positions that he has taken on the trail, and he's got a lot of youthful enthusiasm and a lot of charisma, and so. And then you've got Wiley Nickel, who's got more experience, and he's more used to sort of talking about policy positions, a little bit more nuanced, but nonetheless, we didn't get a ton of details, but, that's not necessarily the candidate's fault. I mean, TV is not always the best medium to get into a lot of detailed policy questions.
One thing that's on voters' minds going into the November 8th election is abortion. They both had something to say about this. They are
very, very different on this one, for sure. So we got a little bit of a shift, I think, in Bo Hines' position. We were asking him, about exceptions. He has previously said he would be in favor of exceptions for the life of the mother. Other than that, he says it's murder, shouldn't be allowed at all. We're talking about the case in Ohio with a 10-year-old girl, and he said he feels like there should be an exception for that. But we were trying to get him to say, well, was it rape or incest, or was it the girl's age? And he said, well, I think it's got to be a case-by-case basis. And you have to look at these circumstances and see what happens. I'm like, well, who's going to look at that? Who's the court to do that, right? Who should be making those decisions? And so then we asked Wiley Nickel about where he thinks the government has a role in deciding whether women should have access to abortion. And he said that he thinks the government's role should be protecting their access to it. I said, well, do you think that there's some point at which the government should step in to protect the life of the fetus? And he said, I don't think that's up to the government. I think that should be between the woman and her doctor. I think this is a deeply personal decision that should not be in the political sphere at all. So obviously two diametrically opposed positions on abortion here. And, of course, it will be a state issue, as Bo Hines pointed out, but nonetheless, people do want to know where they stand on them.
Immigration was one area where they had some common ground, right?
Yeah, it was. I mean, both of them agree. I mean, I think everybody agrees that the border's a mess, there's a humanitarian disaster down there, slow motion disaster unfolding. And I think you don't have to, it's not a partisan question. They both said that they think that the border needs to be fortified to make sure that there are fewer people coming across it, without authorization. But that's pretty much where it stops. Now, we did see a small shift in Bo Hines' earlier position on this. Hines had earlier said that he wanted a 10-year moratorium on all immigration. Now he says that 10-year moratorium would not apply to work visas. He said he believes that the work visa program sufficiently vets the people who are coming in. And of course, it's very economically important to the state to be able to get these workers. They're badly needed in the current labor market, especially. Wiley Nickel said that he, believes that we need to allow more immigration, allow more people in to deal with some of those labor questions that we're talking about. and said that he didn't give a lot of details about what exactly he thinks Congress needs to do, aside from maybe more judges and more people to make that happen, to process people more quickly. In the meantime, Bo Hines had said, that he thought that we had too many people coming in from Central America, and that was limiting the ability of people from other areas like Africa or Europe and to come into the country, given the limited number of immigration visas that we have. So, like I said, they agree that the border's a mess, but after that, it's a little different.
They also had some other solutions for the other issues that are going on in the economy, inflation and so forth. Tell us about those.
We didn't get a lot of details on that, and again, like I said, part of that's because television, but, they both agree that inflation's a problem, definitely. And that people are hurting. The question is, what exactly is it going to take to fix it? What Bo Hines talked a lot about, of course, has been the stimulus spending that the Biden administration has been doing. Talked a lot about the effect of inflation on family paychecks. Wiley Nickel talked about he's got apparently like a 30-point plan to try to address some of these issues, lowering fuel prices, for example, lowering food prices and drug prices. So, they do have more policy information, at least I know Nickel does, available probably than they had time to get into on the show.
Laura, I want to ask you about something completely off the topic here. You're also working on a project about voter education. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so we're calling it NC Votes 101, and it's just basically a series of short stories sort of explaining things from behind the scenes about elections. One of the things that we learned, in the wake of the 2020 election was that a lot of people didn't understand how elections really worked. And so they were easily misled into believing things that were not true about the election process, So what we're trying to do is to get people to send us questions, because we'd, of course, love to answer people's questions about the election process, but to try to debunk some of the things that people most commonly think about, election fraud, that there's hacking of machines going on, for example, is a good one. They're not connected to the internet, right? They're not. There's fake ballots. No, that doesn't work either. There's a lot of these things. And, election officials are beside themselves trying to answer these questions. So, we're trying to help people, trying to do it a little bit for them and just demystify this process. It's not a black box. It's actually very transparent. It's actually got checks and balances all the way through the whole thing. It's just to let people know that that's really how it works.
Laura, thanks for breaking down the race and for your work on NC Votes 101. If you want to see those stories and if you want to see the full on-the-record interview with Bo Hines and Wiley Nickel, visit WRAL.com. Thanks for listening to the WRAL Daily Download. You can also listen to entire WRAL newscasts in podcast form. Find WRAL newscasts in your podcast app. The feed is updated with new newscasts multiple times per day.